Founders on Earth History, Part 4, received by Sal Rachel. Channel's note: this section was revised and edited several times with the assistance of the founders in order to make it more readable and consistent chronologically. The words Dracos and Draconians are used interchangeably, but refer to souls originating in the Alpha Draconis star system. Greetings again, beloved creators. We are the founders, continuing our discourse and offering insight on the Luciferian Rebellion. Up until about 1.5 million years ago in your timeline, Earth continued to attract more and more souls from across the universe. The vibratory level of these souls was generally 4th density, meaning that they were subject to the astral and etheric distortions inherent within that level of vibration. The genetics were now a blend of many races, but the Orions gradually began to dominate. War between Rigel and Betelgeuse had made life rather intolerable for many Orions, and Earth was seen as a place to begin life anew. Unlike the Dracos, the Orions were able to easily land directly on the Earth, in addition to coming through the incarnational process, and so their numbers increased significantly faster than the Dracos, whose reptilian bodies had a hard time adjusting to Earth's atmosphere and gravity. We, the founders, observed with dismay what was going on, but because we were not allowed to interfere, we were like lab technicians watching a specimen multiply out of control and doing nothing to contain it. A group of archangels and ascended beings from 7th, 8th and 9th density were also watching the Earth. Several of these beings are well known to Earth's people, including Archangel Michael. An ascended being that was later given the name Lucifer was among those watching the progress of Earth. Lucifer devised a plan to lessen the chaos on Earth by teaching Earth souls how to control their emotions and use their intellectual capabilities, so they would not be as easily swayed by the negatively polarized factions. Lucifer mistakenly attributed the decaying situation on Earth to unbridled emotions and passion. A group of souls headed by Lucifer came to Earth and established a series of mystery schools designed to train souls in suppressing and controlling the emotional body. The plan backfired because as the students learned to suppress their emotions, their souls became more and more fragmented until their vibration dropped below 4th density into 3rd density. Suppressing any part of the self results in a loss of power and awareness. The shaming of emotion in men, the Victorian suppression of sexual desire, and the making of feelings wrong all had their origins in Lucifer's philosophy. Archangel Michael, seeing what was happening on Earth, found that he could sit by no longer, simply watching, and so he headed a group of ascended beings who voluntarily dropped their vibration and came to Earth, establishing another mystery school designed to raise the vibrations of souls back into the light. Once Michael and his group arrived on Earth, the vibrations were so dense that he and his band of celestial helpers became caught in the game of duality and started seeing the negatively orientated factions as evil forces to overcome. Thus, these angels reinforce the concept of light versus dark on your world. Michael took the side of the light, and many members of the councils of Rigel, as well as most of the Dracos, took the polarity of the dark. Meanwhile, Lucifer and his group maintained their cool, calm aloofness, becoming armchair strategists, watching with interest the battles taking shape. He became so fascinated with this drama of duality that he began building up both sides, through training the light and dark forces to fight each other in the interests of seeing who would be supreme victors. The missing ingredient in all of this was compassion. Lucifer taught the soldiers on the battlefield to suppress their emotions and become hardened to misery and suffering. Archangel Michael taught the soldiers to be passionate and forceful in overcoming the dark forces. When Lucifer saw what Michael was doing, he turned his attention from the Orions and waged war on Michael's forces, and a great battle ensued in the astral and etheric planes above Earth. This became known as the War in the Heavens. Michael's forces were passionate about becoming victors over darkness. Lucifer's forces were cool, calm, and intellectual, and waged their wars through cunning strategy. The third force in all this, the negatively polarized Orions and Draconians, proliferated as their primary foes were now at war with each other. War in the Heavens lasted about 1,000 years, taking place in roughly 500,000 BC. During the period from 1 million BC until 500,000 BC, the population of Earth grew from about 200 million to almost 1 billion people. Because the wars were largely off-planet and did not significantly impact the surface of the Earth or the subterranean cultures, the population did not drop that much during the Luciferian Rebellion. Most of the surface fighting was regional and involved conventional weapons. After about 1,000 years of fighting, a truce was declared, and Lucifer and his group agreed not to promote overt aggression against anyone in the Earth system. Michael realized the futility of fighting the darkness, and also the futility of trying to overcome the suppression of emotional energy by force, and withdrew back into the celestial realms to integrate the lessons learned. Between 500,000 BC and 200,000 BC, life gradually evolved on Earth, and a few souls recaptured their fourth density awareness and began learning how to live cooperatively. During this same period, many more souls came from all over the galaxy, and Earth truly became a melting pot. However, the biggest groups were still the Orions from the Betelgeuse and Rigel. During the Luciferian Rebellion, the councils of Betelgeuse sided with Michael and the light forces, while the councils of Rigel sided with the dark forces. Although there was very little overt hostility during the transition time following the rebellion, both Orion groups generally confined their breeding to their respective polarities, thereby retaining their DNA structure. The Betelgeuse factions remained more peaceful, while the Rigel factions continued to be domineering and aggressive. The pinnacle of population during these times reached almost 1.5 billion, just before a grand cycle around 200,000 BC. The first period of Lemuria started at about 200,000 BC, after one of the grand cycles of 25,920 years had completed. This particular shift wiped out about half of Earth's population through massive earthquakes. The EM shift caused certain lands to break up and move apart, and one landmass became particularly fertile ground for the development of a rather benign civilization. Souls who were attracted to this landmass were generally peaceful people, some originating in the Pleiadian sector, and some from Sirius and Orion. This continent became roughly the size of Australia and was located almost on the same longitude, but a bit further north. What most historians do not realize is that civilization continued on the other continents during the first period of Lemuria, even though the vibration of the other continents was not as refined as it was on Lemuria. This first Lemurian civilization was later called the Land of Mu. It consisted of nearly 500 million souls at its pinnacle. About 3 grand cycles later, the EM fluctuations were such that another catastrophe ensued, and all the landmasses except Lemuria became flooded. Most of the souls who perished in the surrounding continents migrated, reincarnated, on Lemuria, and the population of Lemuria began to skyrocket. This became the second Lemurian period. This period was roughly from about 122,000 BC until about 100,000 BC. At the height of this second Lemurian civilization, the population again reached almost 1 billion people. These souls were not technologically orientated, but were tribal in nature, enjoying music and rhythm, and living in large cities along the coasts. Around 100,000 BC, the comet Ananhutak made a particularly close approach to Earth, and the tail brushed the atmosphere, causing dramatic cooling. The Lemurian people were used to the warm tropical climate, and all of a sudden the temperature dropped 50 degrees Fahrenheit in literally hours, freezing most of them. Those who knew what was coming fled to the sea. Many walked into the sea and drowned. A few tried to build undersea cities, but were largely unsuccessful. There are many legends of the sea that originated during this period. The Lemurian landmass eventually sank beneath the sea due to EM storms that followed the passage of the comet. There were only a handful of survivors, and they migrated to what is now South America and Australia, and later Hawaii and the Philippines. What has not been revealed before, and what has been heavily suppressed on Earth, is that the Alpha Draconians were behind the unusually close passage of the comet. Through a series of nuclear explosions in space, they deliberately forced the trajectory of the comet closer to Earth in order to destroy the civilizations there. The plan was to wipe out the existing life on Earth, and then land and claim the Earth for themselves. They were partially successful in this regard, but landing in their native bodies on Earth was a whole lot harder than incarnating into millions of already existing bodies. Suffice to say that they had a hard time surviving in their reptilian bodies due to the unfavourable gravity and mixture of gases in the atmosphere. Their native bodies mutated and grew in size as they adapted, although their overall numbers remained small. This was the main period that gave rise to the legends of dragons roaming the Earth. The Draconians, not to be defeated that easily, spent long years in laboratories aboard their spacecraft, splicing and mutating various DNA samples until they came up with a human Draco hybrid. The secret involved injecting reptilian DNA into the cerebellum section of the brain, where it quickly mutated the entire system. This part of the human today is still called the Reptilian Brain. While the characteristics of this part involve aggressive and competitive behaviour and the fight or flight syndrome designed to protect the organism, these characteristics, when combined with Orion DNA, became especially potent and dominated the entire organism. Today, about 80% of the DNA in humans is Orion in origin, or maybe we should say Orion-Draco hybrid. What is commonly thought to be human nature is the result of this DNA manipulation by the Draconians and subsequent incarnation by the Orions. As stated in this channel's earlier works, our original DNA blueprint that we were so proud of was reduced to less than 20% of the overall makeup of human beings. Due to the low survival rate of the Draconians after the destruction of Lemuria, the percentage of humans with true reptilian DNA on Earth has remained rather low. Most of the settling of Earth after 100,000 BC and before Atlantis was done by the councils of Rigel and councils of Betelgeuse from Orion. Note, long after the wars in the Orion sector came to an end, over 100,000 years ago, many of the factions that migrated to Earth continued to stay locked in battle mentally to the present day. As you can see by looking around, this trait ranges from civilized militarism and fervent patriotism to overt hostility and barbaric customs. We feel it important to add an explanation here regarding the veils and levels of distortion existing on and above your world during the transition from Lemuria to Atlantis. Both the Alpha Draconians and the Orions had fleets of ships orbiting the Earth during this period. The ships were largely in fourth density. The two groups had a loose alliance based on trading of technology in exchange for keeping hostilities at bay. One of the technologies they had developed was a high-intensity electromagnetic beam capable of disrupting the etheric fields around the Earth. In order to keep their enemies from coming to Earth, they created a force field using this technology. This field not only kept incoming ET groups at bay, but it created a distortion in the Akashic field surrounding the Earth. Although the main library of Akasha does not have a location in time and space, this area above Earth's atmosphere constituted a portal into the Akashic. This is one of the reasons retrieving information during this time period has been so difficult. Another important factor to consider here, and one that has been written about in your books, is the quarantine that went into effect after the destruction of Lemuria. Because the vibratory level of humans had dropped so significantly, Earth was no longer considered a safe and desirable place on which to settle peaceful, loving groups. To prevent the Orions and Draconians from corrupting astral and etheric civilizations on neighbouring worlds, a force field was put into place by the 7th density Pleiadians to keep Earth's business confined to Earth. This veil was not lifted until approximately 1987 AD, the time known as harmonic convergence. Once Earth's instability settled down after the destruction of Lemuria, the Draconians landed and attempted to proliferate, but had a hard time in their reptilian bodies. They then resorted to incarnating through the surviving Lemurians on a relatively stable landmass in what is now the Atlantic Ocean. At the same time, groups of Pleiadians saw the opportunity to once again settle the Earth, and they came as well despite the quarantine. The councils of Rigel and Betelgeuse from Orion also came, and they found the atmosphere of the Earth nearly ideal for rapid proliferation. The DNA of the survivors was now primarily Orion, with some Sirian, Andromedan and Draconian energy as well. As the new civilization began to emerge, the Pleiadian, Orion and Draconian DNA began to mutate, and the new beings became more scientific and intellectual in their evolution. Thus began the first period of Atlantis. These humans still had the reptilian brain, but their cerebral cortex also contained elements of higher Pleiadian virtues and understanding. A civilization began to develop that is very much like the one that exists today, with all manner of technological achievements. The higher Pleiadian mind, combined with the passion of the Orions and the competition of the Draconians, resulted in a structured world of machines and great architecture. Michael and his legions, having been humbled by their mistakes of times past, once again tried to influence the more evolved souls of Atlantis. The councils of Rigel, having backed off during Earth's instability, once again took an interest in what was happening. In addition to the large numbers of their people incarnating into human form, they maintained a presence in spacecraft above the Atlantean continent. Obviously, the quarantine had not worked, and once again Earth was a magnet for all sorts of savoury and unsavoury characters. The first period of Atlantis came to a partial halt during the end of the Grand Cycle in approximately 50,000 BC. However, the civilization was rebuilt, and the final period of Atlantis began. There is much fairly accurate information about Atlantis in several of your channeled writings, including the works of Alice Bailey and Edgar Cayce. We will not duplicate that effort. We will say, however, that the downfall of the second Atlantis occurred in about 23,200 BC and was due to the misuse of crystalline energy generation systems. We will give a brief accounting of how this transpired. About 2,000 years before the end of Atlantis, the Atlanteans developed radionics devices using quartz crystals. They were able to generate all the energy they needed for virtually every part of their civilization. This energy was powerful enough to tempt the unsavory aspects of the society. Several Atlantean scientists made deals with Orion groups orbiting the Earth, trading technology in an attempt to gain superiority. This is similar to what is occurring today between certain Earth factions and the Zeta Reticulans. The Orion-based insurgents wanted greater and greater power from the energy-generating crystals, and they began engineering them to be used as weapons. They never got the chance to wage war because one of the particularly strong crystal generators exploded, sinking the continent and most of her inhabitants. Only a tiny handful escaped in airships, and an even smaller number in sea-going vessels. Over 90% of those that tried to escape by sea were drowned in massive tsunamis. Those that fled in airships relocated to what is now Central and South America, as well as Egypt. This channel has discovered that nearly all of the people he works with in past life remembrance and healing sessions had an integral part in the downfall of Atlantis. We, the founders, remained largely in observation mode as usual during this period. It was our perception that what really destroyed Atlantis was an imbalance between the head and the heart. The scientifically orientated hybrids of the Atlantean period had once again suppressed their emotions in a manner similar to the Luciferians, and in so doing, most Atlanteans lost their ability to discern between energies that were supportive of spiritual growth and those that merely led to the accumulation of physical, astral, and etheric power. Had the inhabitants of Atlantis been balanced in their emotional and mental bodies, they would have seen what was happening and been able to take steps to prevent it. We see a similar scenario being played out in your modern world today. We will say that you are very close to where you were at the time of the destruction of Atlantis. However, there are two important differences. The divine dispensation is allowing a large number of souls to awaken to higher states of consciousness today, and there are many benevolent ET groups that are closely monitoring the state of affairs on your world and will act in an instant to prevent large-scale nuclear war. In addition, these groups have sophisticated technologies that can detect exotic and unusual weapons before they are tested. We have not yet covered a very important part of your history, that of the Egyptian, Biblical and Greek periods. There is another player in the drama that forcefully shaped the cultures emerging after Atlantis, and that was the Syrians. In the next section, we will examine the role of the Syrians in Jewish, Christian and Greek mythology. In addition, we will offer our perspective on what really happened during the time of Jesus, who he was, what he actually did, and where the distortions lie in the official historical accounting. We will also take a brief look at the Aztec, Toltec and Mayan cultures at a later date. We are the founders. This is the end of part 4. We are the founders.